you want to be a public speaker, or you are a public speaker and you want to build on your talent, well, this is the second in the series, and I hope you'll go back to the first one because there's some good detail in there and I've had some wonderful feedback already. Now, so this is the second one. Please, if you're enjoying these, subscribe and you'll be notified as they come through. Public speaking is one of the most influential desires that anyone can have, literally, because you will influence a crowd, 2 people, 3, 500, 1,000, no matter how big or small the group, you are wanting influence. That's what public speakers do. So today, what I'd like to do is go through some detail of how to put together speech, message, sermon, etc. I want to also say before we begin that public speaking should be a trusted vocation. In other words, what you have to say should be trusted, which is why I often say that I validate everything I say publicly, spiritually, theologically, emotionally, relationally, socially, and because what I want is for the audience, no matter whether it's a church or in the corporate setting, I want the audience or the congregation to trust what I have to say. So it's important you are that person. If all you want to do is become famous, then this is not for you. You will probably become famous because, number one, you are interested in the detail. You're not interested, or you are interested more in the subject than being interested in people looking at you. Right? This is why I often say to public speakers, don't bring attention to you. Take the attention off you and on to the subject. In relation to putting together a message of any kind, you want to, number one, relate your intentions clearly. Now, what I mean by that is you will have an introduction. You will have the body of the message. You will have some stories in the middle of that message, and you will have a conclusion. Now, have you ever listened to somebody and thought to yourself, now, where are they going with this? That's because their introduction was lacking. If I was, for example, going to talk about Australia, I might begin by saying, today I want to talk to you about a country that I love. I want to talk to you about its early beginnings, its indigenous people. I want to talk to you about something called Federation, a little town in Australia that became famous as a result. What country am I talking about? I'm talking about Australia. Instantly, the audience knows where I'm going. I'm talking about Australia. I've given a few little bullet points along the way as to where I'm headed with what I'm going to say. Now, I've either lost the audience immediately or I've pulled them in. Irrespective, keep to the subject that you've chosen to speak on. So number one, you'll have your title. Sometimes I wrestle with the title myself. There are times I will consider my title when I'm finished what I have to say, and I'll look through and I'll go, there's a good title. You'll then have an introduction. Now that introduction, as I said, should have the entire body of what you're going to say encapsulated in a few short sentences. Then, of course, you'll have point one. Before you get to point one, you want to have a good transitional sentence. We talked about that in the first installment of this. A transitional sentence is merely a sentence that ties 2 points together. In this case, the introduction and point one. It may be a question, it may be a statement, it doesn't have to be a big deal. A transition is merely that, a transitional sentence. On what I write, I will always have the word transition, or trans ... and the sentence that I want to say. After that, you'll have your point one. Clearly write it down what this point is. Underneath that, very simple, you've seen it before, A, B, C, D. It may very well be that you'll have a story in there. Now, you got to practice telling stories. If you're not good at telling stories, don't tell the story, but practice them and include them along the way when you can. Storytelling is so important. A story becomes three-dimensional. All right? You tell a story, and it's not that people will remember, it's that people can't forget. And that's the point of a story. It's that people cannot forget what you've had to say. I don't know how many times people have said, oh, I remember what you spoke about. Hang on, I remember that story. And so the story should be meaningful. Personally, I don't like telling a lot of jokes unless the joke has got something to do with what I'm going to say. Stick to the point. Remain ethical as a speaker. When you're asked to speak somewhere, always ask them, what would you like me to speak on? If they give you latitude, then don't abuse that latitude. Ensure that you understand the vision and the purpose or the company or the church, whatever it might be. Have that conversation before you prepare what you have to say. Remain ethical. Okay, so number one, you've got your introduction. Then you've got your transitional sentence. Then you have your point, your first point. You may have a story in there. Having said that, you're going to need to transition into your second point. You may also include what's called a propositional sentence. A propositional sentence is like a mini point. It's not a transitional sentence. It's not it's not the big deal. It's not part of your second point necessarily, but invariably it retains within it a question. It's to call people in to consider what you've just said or what you're about to say. It's a point of fact. So it's either a fact or a question called a propositional sentence. So what do we have? Introduction, transition, point one, perhaps a story. Then you have a transitional sentence into your second point and or possibly both, a propositional sentence, which is a point of fact and or a question. As you can see already, a good speech or a good message has preparation involved within it. Now, I to this day, after some decades of public speaking, still prepare. Now, I can obviously speak off the cuff. If somebody asks me, could you just get up and speak? Yeah, all good, I'll just get on up. But that's come after years of preparing. And most times, 99.9% of the time, I will prepare and prefer to prepare what I have to say. Now, you just continue to follow this order as you have with point one. You'll have your transition and perhaps a propositional sentence, and then into your second point, and so on, mixing in with it a story or two. When you're coming to your conclusion, you want to have the entire body of what you've had to say now within the conclusion. Just like you did in the introduction, you had some brief notes in relation to what you're going to say. Now you have some brief notes in relation to what you have said. However, a conclusion is the most important of all, because this is where you're driving people to the point of what you've had to say. Now, it should have a question, a propositional sentence within it. It should have a story that helps people remember what you have said. Like I said, if you're not good at storytelling yet, well, that's okay. Practice not only makes perfect, it makes permanent. And it's a good idea to force yourself sometimes just to do what feels uncomfortable. Good idea to practice ahead of time, particularly with stories though. All right, so your conclusion will have the entire body of what you've had to say, not at great length. So if it was, let's say, a half an hour message, my conclusion may last no more than 3 or 4 minutes. It'll have a question. I invariably almost always have a story, a propositional statement or question within it. Remember, a proposition is a statement of fact or a question. And then I will wrap it up. If it's in a church, invariably I will close in prayer. I will ask for people to respond to that sometimes. If it's in a corporate setting, I will invariably just say thank you and leave the stage. Remember, don't bring the attention to you. Bring the attention to the subject. Remain ethical in all you're saying and all you're doing. Follow the pattern of what I've shown you right here, and you'll prepare something that is believable because you are focused in on the subject and not you. Ensure that you validate everything that you have to say before you speak it publicly. You want to stay trusted. You want people to listen to you and know when they hear you, whether it's exciting or not, they'll know it's the truth. That's important. Don't make off-the-cuff statements that are just not true. There are times in preaching, I may say, I'm going to use some preacher's license here. I will never use, I'll never make up a verse of the Bible. I will never, if it's just my idea, I will always say, this is just my idea. Be clear with the audience or the congregation that you're talking with so that you're invited back next time. It's not about today's speech, today's sermon, today's message. It's about tomorrow's. You want to be trusted, have a reputation like that, and put together something that people will leave knowing they've been challenged, they've been able to follow you, and they'll not just remember, they won't be able to forget. Okay, this is the second in our series. I'm going to do a third as well, perhaps a fourth and even a fifth. These will help you, and I trust that they do. Write me a message. If you have a question on public speaking, write me a message. I'll mention it in the video. If you don't want me to mention your name, just say, don't mention my name, but I have a question. And I'll be more than happy to answer that in the next video or the one after. Remember, mistakes happen when you're public speaking. It's okay. Move on. Don't act embarrassed. And for goodness sake, if you're going to speak for the first time, don't tell people it was the first time. Just get up with a sense of confidence, with a good attitude, because you've practiced, and it's going to be okay.